You were on the Shark Tank carpet pitching BottleKeeper. And I believe this is a quote, Mark Cuban said, "You're either the worst business people in the world or you don't need to be here." And then when all's said and done, he and Lori Greiner gave you $1 million.
Welcome to Midland Money Mindset, your weekly dose of inspiration and insights to ensure you enjoy each step of your journey. Whether you're saving for the future, planning your next big adventure, or simply looking to add more joy to your life, you've come to the right place. Now, let's dive in.
Too many entrepreneurs believe that success demands endless hustle, massive teams, and outside investors, only to find themselves exhausted and unfulfilled. But what if the secret to freedom was less, not more? Today's guest, Adam Callinan, proved it's possible. As the co-founder of BottleKeeper, he built a $60 million company with just 4 employees and 0 investors. Then turn that hard-won experience into Pentane, a powerful system helping founders scale smarter and live better. From Shark Tank to 2 successful exits, Adam's story is about redefining what success really means: building wealth, purpose, and joy on your own terms. I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Midland Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Midland Financial. Let's dive into the show. Well, I'm super excited today to have Adam Callinan, founder of Pentane. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. And we kick off the show because I always find, and our listeners are really enamored by the entrepreneurial journey. And, as different as they are, sometimes there's similarities there as well. And we'll talk a lot about what you're doing today with Pentane and what you've done recently. But before we do that, can you share with our listeners a little bit about who you are and kind of what led you to your entrepreneurial journey, if you will?
I am first and foremost, and this is something I'm very, very crystal clear about. I'm first and foremost a dad and a husband. Those are my very clear priorities. And you might see that as we go through the story, how I have made decisions and built my life around that priority.
Love it.
I'm in Montana, so I'm also an avid outdoorsman and doer of hard things. That's also a practice that I have developed and built. And the entrepreneurship really started out of college, but I didn't realize this until probably my 30s, that I was kind of seeded with entrepreneurship early on by my grandfather, who was a wacky inventor. He was the guy that was like building a race car in his garage that had a toilet seat for the driver's seat. And he was just always inventing these things and creating these things. And we were like hacking these goofy little companies together at a really young age, maybe 7 or 8. So I think it was always in there. I was always comfortable with risk. And that's a big part of entrepreneurship. So it was a fairly natural progression out of my nerdy science degree in college.
Yeah, sounds like it was embedded in you. And I love with, you starting off with the family stuff, because I do as well. I always tell people that I'm a husband to Denise and father to my 2 boys, because I am similar. Same thing, very important. Your e-commerce company, BottleKeeper, generated more than $60 million in sales with just 4 employees and no investors. How did that product come to be? And why do you think the product just took off and resonated with people?
I would separate the product from the company, because how we built the company is most of what created that outcome and that experience. I honestly think that probably 20% of it had to do with the actual product, and 80% had to do with how it was built and the guardrails that were put in place, which comes from prior experience. Out of college, I went to University of Arizona and got a crazy science degree, which was good because the scientific method is really helpful in business. I went into a medical device startup. I was not a partner or owner of that business, but I got to participate in building a company from almost nothing. It was like when I got there, it was working out of an apartment. And we got to build and scale that company up, and I learned a lot. And over the course of a decade, we had spun off a tech piece, and we can go down that rabbit hole if you want. But I left that. I sold my position in the tech piece, and I realized that prior decade, I had worked my brains out like they were gone. And the way that business was structured was so heavy and so hard to get away from. And granted, this is about the time of Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek. So naturally, I read that, and that took me down this whole build lean rabbit hole. So when BottleKeeper came about, it was my cousin's idea. He solved his own problem drinking a beer on the beach out of a red Solo cup. scratched his own itch, which is often how these things get going. And I had just sold out of that tech company. And so we came together, but I was really adamant that we build the opposite of what I just got done doing. So I very, very early on said, we'll go do this together, but I'm going to build it in a way that does not require employees. So I put that constraint on the business from the very beginning, which forced me to build and solve problems in a really unique, different way.
Right. So what do you mean by, you said it was 80% the process is what you said, right? And 20% was the product. What do you mean by that?
The process of, let's back up. I put constraints on the company. Mm-hmm. Constraints are incredibly valuable. They feel painful, sure, but they can also be insanely valuable. And the constraints that we put on were no employees, no investors. I didn't want to go raise money. That was another huge constraint. And the third, which is really tied to the first two, is that I wanted to be able to operate the business from anywhere in the world that had internet. Putting those constraints on the business meant we didn't have payroll. We didn't have an office. We didn't have like a crazy benefit structure. We had no fixed expenses for years. The result of that is that, this being a financial podcast, like these decisions have heavy financial implications into the business. Our margins were good because we knew they needed to be. And the result of which is we got to reinvest an incredible amount of literally all of our cash flow back into the business, growing it. And that was at a time, which is different than today, but this is in 2014, 15, 16. That was at a time when Facebook, you could just spend money and you would just get it back at 10 to 20x. And so because we had no real operating expenses, we had an incredible amount of extra cash to just pour back into the business, which is how we did $8 million in our third year with no employees, 0 employees. And I was out of the country with my wife, Katie, for half the year. So it was those constraints helped us to create that outcome. Obviously, the product had to work, but right. I think it was more of what happened behind the scenes that created much of that outcome.
So it sounds like Facebook was your one of your key employees, if you will, in terms of sales army almost.
I have spent an incredible amount of money with Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
I mean, that was good. It was fine early on, but that also became a problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reality is what that resulted in is I built the revenue model on Facebook. So when Facebook stopped working quite so well, which was kind of a slippery slope forever, it got a lot more challenging in the later years of that business. So
I think people forget that when you're using those platforms, and it's not just Facebook, there are others out there too, right? That help for sales as well, Amazon, et cetera. You're somewhat at the liberty of whatever their algorithm is or how they want to show you. So there is that risk because you're just leasing your audience. You don't own the audience, which is something we've talked about very often on the show. Besides the cost structure with regard to the not having any employees, right? And the benefits package. I mean, was it simply around that, or were there other complications that led you to want to put that constraint on the company with scaling in that regard with virtually no staff?
I think that it was probably the backwards version of what I just said. We wanted to go and be able to travel the world because we had not at that point in our life, my wife and I, at that point already been together for 10 years. We met in college because we had not had the ability to do that. So I think it was probably more of that's the outcome that we want to create. And then we worked backwards from what are the things that need to be in place for that to be a reality. And again, like anybody that's read 4-Hour Workweek or anything lean startup wise, that was when those books and concepts were really big. And so I was reading about ways to build scalable businesses by automating technologies and getting the things to work together. And that was a thing you could do in 2014. That would have been much more difficult in 2005. Right. And now in 2025, it's entirely different with AI. So that whole picture is evolving, but you could do that then. And so I'm a systems person. Like I like big, complex puzzles. That's why I like science and math. And so being able to construct that puzzle to solve the problem we were trying to solve, it was an incredible, fun challenge for me.
Yeah. I know you said, constraints cause challenges, right? But at the same time, I think constraints cause opportunity because if you don't have those constraints and you could do anything and go anywhere, I think that's even more challenging than having the constraints in the first place.
And it often leads to something unique, to a solution that is unique, right? I mean, if you don't have $1 million in the bank of someone else's money, you're going to think of solving problems differently. I have seen this with people that I know personally, and I know are incredible operators that have gone and raised money and done some really silly things with that money. And then suddenly they can't raise the money anymore and they have to completely rethink the way that they operate and really go back to where they should have been at the very beginning.
Right.
So it's just money is the one really big thing that if not having it forces you to solve problems in a really unique way that tends to create a lot more durability.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things I think is interesting when we talk about taking on money and investors, et cetera, you were on Shark Tank and you were on the Shark Tank carpet pitching BottleKeeper. And I believe this is a quote, Mark Cuban said, "You're either the worst business people in the world or you don't need to be here." And then when all said and done, he and Lori Greiner gave you $1 million. So it's kind of ironic you talked about $1 million for a 5% stake in BottleKeeper. But it got interesting because after over 6 months in due diligence, which I think a lot of people don't realize, maybe they do so more now than early on in the show, they don't realize that right then and there, the deal's not done. There's still the whole due diligence process. But you got there, you got the offer, you go through 6 months of due diligence, and then ultimately you decided to pass on the deal. Was that really why, what you just talked to us about? Or were there other things as you went through that process that you learned as well that kind of made you pass?
After we left, there's a whole series of things that happen after, they say cut, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. And as any investment ever, and again, unless it's like your rich uncle that just loves you and believes in you, there's going to be a due diligence period. And in the case of Shark Tank, that's really unique because they film the whole season in a month, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have 25 companies or 50, I don't even know what the number is, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 companies that they all just did a deal with on TV. So they have this wait period where they're not doing anything until the shows are done taping. And we were in the beginning of that cycle. So we probably had a month of just sitting still anyways. And then you get serious and having real conversations. In the case of Lori, who was epic, she was incredible. She would just call me. It was awesome. She was amazing to deal with. Her husband was also incredible. He was involved. She was really adamant that our product go on to QVC and that it be a really heavy QVC product, which didn't make sense for our brand. We were a more premium brand. And so we just politely declined. And again, we had a great relationship with her. She was awesome to work with. In the case of Mark, who we never talked to one time after the high five at the end of the episode or whatever it was, he had a team of people, slightly different experience. And what we, over the course of months and months and months of due diligence, we had people fly out from Texas and spend time with them. And over the course of that, we made the decision that we didn't actually want to take money from Mark. We wanted to have a business relationship with Mark, but we had no investors at that point. So we didn't want to take on the fiduciary liability to Mark Cuban. And they were perfectly fine with that. They were like, wait, you want to do a deal and we don't have to give you money? Okay. We negotiated a consulting agreement that had us vesting Mark 2% of the company over the course of 2 years in monthly increments that we could cancel at any time, which he was great with. The problem, which may resonate with your financial audience, the problem is that we had just broken our partnership election to become an S corporation, to elect taxation as an S corp the year before. Mm-hmm. And he needed his interest to be in an LLC, and you can't have an LLC own a position in an S corp. So it was going to cause us to break that election, and you can only do that every couple of years. Otherwise, there's this massive tax implication. And for us, it was going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars to break that election, which obviously didn't make sense for us to pay that basically for access to a Rolodex, which is what we were going for.
Right. So ultimately, you passed because you didn't want to have the investors, which was interesting. What was the thought process? Because it sounds like, and I'm curious about this, right? It seems like you put these constraints that you mentioned early on the company, very early on, that you didn't want to have any of these things. But what ultimately led you to go down the Shark Tank route and even put yourself in that position when you had those constraints? What was the thought process there?
Do you want the honest answer or the dishonest answer?
No, we're all about honesty, right?
Customer acquisition, marketing. It's the most epic customer acquisition tool on the planet. Mm-hmm. We were open to taking on capital in exchange for that insane level of free customer acquisition.
Okay.
Flat out. This is in 2018. At that point, we had done, if you saw the episode, you'll have seen, we got really lucky with timing. We filmed that a week before Father's Day, which was our second biggest holiday of the year. We had trailing 12 months revenue was over $10 million. We had done $1 million in the week before the taping. But the reality is that all of that was built on Facebook. And we had an opportunity to go and put the company on national TV and something that was going to re-air today. It still re-airs probably twice a month through today. We don't even own the company anymore. It's great. It's like the gift that keeps on giving, and you don't pay to go on the show. You don't give up an equity percentage or anything. So it was worth, and to be really clear, they're smart. Like Mark and Lori are not, that's exactly who we wanted to go in and get. And we wanted them as partners. It was just what they eventually wanted and what we wanted didn't match. And so it didn't make sense to execute the deals. But it was incredible for the business.
Do you know finances can be joyful with your partner? We created a fantastic guide for couples to start their journey surrounding their finances. Head over to Midland.us/couplesjoy to download your free copy today. Don't miss out. Start bringing more joy into your financial conversations. I don't know if you're familiar with Coco Vinny. We've had him on the show, and he's been on both Shark Tank and The Profit. And he didn't get deals in either of those situations. And I think the last time I had talked to him, he equates it to almost like the equivalent of like $30 or $40 million in advertising from all the times they keep replaying the show for him. He's like, it's an incredible generator for awareness in business.
Yeah, we went through the same exercises. You know, we had, by the time we were at that scale, the handful of employees we had a really good director of marketing. He was very data-driven and analytical, and he would put together an analysis anytime we did anything TV related, whether it was to go on Good Morning America or anything, on what it would cost to reach that number of people in our given ad platforms. And it was like unbelievable. It was insane. I mean, it was easily millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of free advertising.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing also the opportunity you had with Mark and the fact that ultimately tax planning kind of led to it not being a good decision and parting ways. Because I think many times people don't necessarily think all those things through. And I think it gets clouded sometimes. So I think those are important lessons to learn and keep in mind as entrepreneurs, that it's not just finding somebody that you align with, finding the capital, finding the relationship. There are other ancillary things that need to be looked at and considered. Ultimately, you ended up walking away from there because of those tax considerations. But then basically, I believe it was 3 years later, you did decide to be acquired. What was the thought process there? Was that something that you guys had planned for, or was it just, it seemed like the timing was right, the business was where it needed to be at that point?
Both. We didn't start the company with the intent that it was going to be a generational, like, hand this off to the kids company. In hindsight, like, I had wanted to be a doctor my entire life. That's why I went and got a crazy science degree. And I came out and decided to not be a doctor, which is why I went into medical, sort of like the good blend of business and the medical part of, which was a big part of my life. And then I sold beer products. It was awesome. I learned a ton, but there was like mist. There was this huge bucket in my soul that got missed doing that. It was great because I got to be impactful to my family and my friends and some people around us, but it missed this big piece. So we built that company very intentionally to have as many value points as possible. One of those being profitability. One of them was patents. We spent a lot of time and money on patents. We had 42 when we got acquired. One was a premium brand. And our assumption, which worked out really well, and I will forever do, is that if you can build value across a number of points in a business, someone will always want to buy it, especially if it's not losing money. So we had just got to the point where we were kind of tired of doing that after 9 years. And we had a number of companies or people, who knows how many of them were spam, but like reach out to have a conversation around acquisition. And it just got to the point where we started listening. And then it happened relatively quickly. We had a couple of different entities involved, which is great from a negotiating standpoint.
Right.
And did end up going through with a full 100% acquisition with a private equity group called WinPoint Partners.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, I think in many regards, your journey, this journey, BottleKeeper's journey, really sounds like something that really any entrepreneur would wish for if they could kind of map it out. But you've shared that it was unbelievably difficult from the start to the finish. And, I think this goes hand in hand with that picture of the iceberg where, everybody looks at the iceberg and what's showing outside the water, but none of us see what's below the water and all those things that made it hard and difficult. What during this journey for you, what made it so hard along the way over that 9-year period?
Yeah, let's be clear. All entrepreneurship is hard.
Yeah.
If someone tells you that it's not, they're either lying or they're a sociopath. Like they're such a glutton for punishment that they enjoy it. And good on them. All of it is hard. Every LinkedIn post you see from somebody about how they're crushing this or meet this goal or raised $1 bazillion, which by the way, just means they're running a business that doesn't make money. Like they're just giving you that tip of the iceberg. And I think it's important to be honest and real about the struggle. I mean, after 2016, we did $8 million in revenue in 2016 with no employees. I don't know exactly what it was. I'm sure we netted at least 2 million of it because we had no expenses. I was sitting in a cafe in Europe with my wife and friends on New Year's, and I was a mental disaster because that business, we made half our revenue in the month of December with no employees. So we did $4 million in the month of December. That level of anxiety-ridden stimulation, and then December 20th, it turns off. It goes completely silent. That was so difficult on me. And I did not at that time have the pieces in place to be able to mentally process that. It's like, I've never done any of the drugs I'm about to say, but I feel like it's like doing some heavily illicit drug like heroin or something where you have these incredible highs and then you fall off of it and it just like wrecks your life. Now, this wasn't that, and I should have been the happiest person on the planet, but it was really, really, really difficult. And that was the good stuff. There were times like, I violated all my own principles and we hired a bunch of people after that Shark Tank year. We made $1.8 million in net profit in 2018. And I gave all of it back the next year. We literally, because I went and I hired a bunch of people, we opened an awesome office. We had a sweet roof deck, but I changed the underlying equation in the business. Despite having the systems in place to tell me these were red flag things, I didn't listen to them.
Yeah.
You know how painful it is to like lay off 6 people that you really like, and they're really good at their jobs. It just like doesn't fit the model. So there are real ups and downs with entrepreneurship. Everybody deals with them. And I definitely think it's important to be real about the things we do and the mistakes we make. And it's all part of the deal.
I appreciate you sharing the below the water view of the iceberg, because I think that's something that doesn't get talked about, shown very often, in the entrepreneurial world. I think many times between other entrepreneurs, they talk about it, commiserate about it, but I don't think to the general public. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's helpful to others to understand what it takes and what goes into some of these journeys, if not all the journeys, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about what you're doing today, because I'm a process and systems guy too. And I have to ask you now, what was the driver for you to make the shift now, take what you've learned, right, through your previous ventures to create Pentane and now to help other early stage e-commerce brands? What's driving you there? When
we were acquired, that closed in March of 2021. I was on through the end of the year as a CEO to oversee the transition because they placed us with one of their bigger portfolio companies called Arctic Outdoors. And after that, I was forced by a performance coach to sit still for 6 months. I got into woodworking and doing things with my hands, which is now a huge part of my life. But his position was, you're going to want to go start another company and you are not mentally ready to do that. So don't. Of course, I did it anyways. And thankfully, I didn't put a bunch of money into it, but it was a total disaster because he was right. I was not in the right headspace to make smart decisions around business yet. So I took the time, I did the thing. And one day I woke up and realized that my hardest decision for the entire day was what to have for breakfast, which is a problem. I could literally feel my brain melting. So I went, his name was Dr. Jeff. I went to Dr. Jeff and he said, okay, we're ready. Go find something to do. Go to companies you invested in and ask them to help. And I did that. And I quickly realized that those businesses were good businesses, but they didn't really understand how to make money. They knew that it was, at the end of the day, it's like your net profit is equal to your revenue minus expenses, but they didn't understand really how that revenue soup gets made or really how those expenses get chopped up. And they, not every expense weighs on the business the same way. And that was something that we did really well at BottleKeeper. My cousin and I built systems with math to understand how to run a profitable business and how to build an advertising budget that's profitable and how it needs to perform and what happens to all of that if we hire somebody, because it changes. What happens if we run a discount? It changes. What happens if we get hit with a tariff? It changes. That. Those are all pieces of the equation. And we ran the whole company on that from start to finish. So I rebuilt some of those systems in a much cleaner, sexier way inside these companies, and it totally changed the way that they operated. One of them increased their net profit by 50% the following cycle with a 10% increase in revenue. It was a nominal revenue increase because it clarified to them how to pull levers in the business to impact that. So I did that a couple of times, and it became wildly apparent that this needed to not just be complex math in spreadsheets and needed to be a platform, which now is Pentane, which is built for really today specific to early stage e-commerce companies, although the math is the same for every company on the planet. But it's where we can be really, really helpful. The system can be really helpful in just flat showing that operator what to do to achieve their net profit goal. It's very directive. Amazing. It's really specific.
Yeah, great stuff. And you actually you're having a lot more impact across many, many different companies. And one of the things I've heard you say is talk about is the importance of authenticity, which you've talked about a few times on the show so far, in a world that we're seeing is increasingly dominated now by AI. And this has you putting yourself actually out there more, including your podcast, Growth Mavericks. Why do you believe putting yourself out there will be and is a difference maker?
I mean, the short version is AI. I think that building a business and trying to do it in a way that does not rely on paid advertising, which it may become apparent through the sequence of stories. I learn a lot from scar tissue. So I'm not going to build another company entirely on paid advertising. And frankly, we haven't used any of it, not $1 in Pentane. And so it's also a software company. Now it's a complex software company. So it's not a thing that, a kid with cursor can pop up in a weekend. Like, it's really complicated. The math is very complex and AI is really bad at math. And I think that as we continue to get inundated with AI and really questioning what is real and not real, which is happening right now. I mean, right now, I see a video on a social platform. I have no idea if it's real or not. So I think that people are going to continue to want to know who they buy from, and they're going to want to know who that person is and what they talk about, and that they're real and authentic. And so I have gone from being an extremely private person that doesn't use social media at all to realizing that it is important for me to have some of myself and my more personal self, the things that we do in living in Montana with hard things in the woods and hunting and outdoor backcountry stuff and building things with our hands, just more personal content, I think is going to continue to become really important as we as a society knee-jerk react away from AI and more towards like human engagement and interaction.
Yeah, I agree. It took me, like you, a little while to get there because my wife, who's our chief marketing officer for a long time, was trying to get me to share more. And I was like, people don't want to know that. People don't want to see that. But thankfully, back in 2019, we took a leap and it's been transformative to our practice on the wealth management side. And I can see now how you're talking about, obviously in 2019, the AI situation was quite different than it is today. But thankfully, I did it back then because I think you're right. It helps separate and differentiate us in a world where you don't necessarily know, is that real or not? It kind of separates you and has a lot of impact, I believe.
Yeah. And in a world where in a year or 5 years or 9 years or whatever that is, software is going to be effectively free to create. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you stand out in a space like that? I mean, there's a lot that we do to build moat, and there's a really unique business model things that'll be almost impossible to replicate with AI. But the other way is being yourself as a brand. Now, I don't want to be a big influencer, but I do want to have content out there so that people that look at finding a solution around profitability know who the person is behind it, and that there's a real story and a real tales to be told.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So listen, it's been a pleasure having you on, and it brings me a lot of joy, this conversation really does. And our listeners are always waiting for the answer to our final question that we ask each guest, because we are all about joy, and this is the Midland Money Mindset. And that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
I build into my day things to go and do with my hands that force me to get away from a computer. So what I did literally right before this that brought me great joy is I removed a fan belt off the engine of a 1994 Defender, Land Rover Defender that is currently in my garage and broken down as of yesterday. And it's just doing things with my hands versus doing things on a computer. It's really hard to have. They never get done. They just live forever and they evolve. I really like having things that's like, this is a task. I'm going to go do that. And the outcome of it is this thing is going to be done. I have to have those things. So, which is why my hands look very mechanic-like right now. They're all greasy and oily. But so I build those types of things into my life.
Wow, amazing stuff. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing that. And Adam, we're going to have all of your information and Pentane's information in the show notes. But if people want to learn more about your journey, connect with you, have a question, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, Pentane.com is the website. You'll find content there. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn, screaming, yelling about business stuff and trying to help people build resiliency and durability to be able to withstand the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. That's also why Growth Mavericks exists. That's part business, part lifestyle, sort of building anti-fragility into being able to get to that next inflection point inside your business. That's important.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking out the time to share your journey and being vulnerable and showing us under the water with regard to the iceberg. I appreciate that greatly and enjoy the rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Adam Callinan reminds us that real success isn't about more investors or bigger teams. It's about clarity, courage, and control. His journey from BottleKeeper to Pentane proves that with the right mindset and systems, you can scale your business and your joy. Thanks for joining us on the Midland Money Mindset, where we turn money conversations into powerful lessons for life, growth, and lasting freedom. Adam Callinan and all he is up to can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Midland Money Mindset. Remember, it's not just about the money, it's finding joy in the journey and embracing the right mindset. If you love the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Don't forget to follow along for more tips and inspiration. Please visit the social links below to connect with Larry or his guests. Until next time, keep smiling, keep thriving, and remember to think about, what did you do today that brought you joy?
The opinions voiced in the Midland Money Mindset Show with Lawrence Sprung are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy ensures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial or tax advisor prior to investing. Investment advisory services offered through CWM LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. Guests on the Midland Money Mindset Show are not affiliated with CWM LLC.